Part 1. The Call That Changed Everything. The bank manager's voice didn't sound like it usually did. Not polite. Not rehearsed. Not safe. "Sir," he said slowly, "before you come in, don't come alone. Bring your sons." I tightened my grip on the phone. "My sons?" I repeated. "Why would I need to bring my sons?" "I'm just asking about my late wife's account." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for my chest to feel tight. "It's better this way," he finally said, "after what we found." The line went dead. For a moment I just stood there in my quiet kitchen, staring at the faded photo of my wife on the fridge. Margaret, gone for almost a year now. Heart failure. That's what they told me. No drama, no secrets, just grief. Or so I thought. Margaret had always handled the finances. She liked order, ledgers, little notebooks with dates, and numbers written in neat, careful handwriting. When she passed, I didn't touch any of it. I wasn't ready. And honestly, I didn't think there was much to touch. We weren't rich. Or at least, I believed we weren't. I called my sons that night. Daniel answered first. He's the practical one, accountant. Numbers calm him. "What's wrong, Dad?" he asked. "I need you and your brother to come with me to the bank tomorrow," I said. They found something tied to your mother." There was a brief silence. Then Daniel said, "Found what?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. But the bank manager told me not to come alone. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying moments with Margaret. Her late-night walks. Her sudden trips to clear her head. The way she always insisted on checking the mail herself. The locked drawer in her desk I never opened. Had I missed something? Or worse, had she been protecting us from something? The next morning, my sons arrived early. My younger son, Lucas, tried to joke on the drive. "Maybe Mom left us a surprise fortune," he said with a forced laugh. I didn't laugh. When we pulled up to the bank, I noticed something strange immediately. The manager was already waiting at the door. Not inside, outside. And when he saw us, his face went pale. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "All of you." That's when I knew. Whatever my wife left behind, it wasn't just money. It was a truth big enough to require witnesses. Before we go any further, if you enjoy stories filled with mystery, family secrets, and shocking twists that unfold piece by piece, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what comes next. Because what we discovered inside that bank changed how I saw my wife and my own life forever. Next in part 2, inside the bank vault, we come face to face with a document none of us were prepared to see, and a name that should have been impossible. Part 2, the vault that was never meant for me. The bank doors closed behind us with a dull, heavy thud. I remember that sound clearly because it felt final. Like the last door shutting on the life I thought I knew. The manager, Mr. Holloway, didn't lead us toward the customer desks or the offices. Instead, he gestured toward a secured hallway marked, "Authorized personnel only." Daniel noticed immediately. "This isn't the usual area," he said, his voice cautious. Mr. Holloway nodded. "What we're about to show you isn't routine." As we walked, my mind raced. I kept thinking of Margaret's hands, gentle, warm, always busy. Could those same hands have signed documents hidden behind steel doors? We stopped in front of a biometric lock. The manager scanned his fingerprint, entered a long code, then turned to me. "Mr. Carter," he said, "this vault was opened under your wife's name. Only 2 people were authorized to access it." "And the second?" Lucas asked. Mr. Holloway hesitated. "Your wife never disclosed that to us." The door slid open. Cold air spilled out, carrying the faint metallic smell of paper, steel, and time. Inside were rows of safety deposit boxes, but we didn't stop there. At the back of the vault was a separate, reinforced cabinet, larger, newer, and clearly expensive. "This," the manager said softly, "is what your wife asked us to secure." He pulled out a thick envelope sealed with wax. My wife's handwriting was on the front. To be opened only with my family present. My knees nearly gave out. Daniel steadied me. Dad, you okay? I am, I lied. Mr. Holloway placed the envelope on a steel table. Before you open this, I need to be very clear. What's inside changes legal ownership, inheritance rights, and personal history. Lucas swallowed. Just tell us what it is. The manager shook his head. It has to come from her. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were documents. Lots of them. Account statements, property deeds, trust agreements, and then the number that made my breath stop. 4870 there. Daniel let out a sharp breath. That's $14 million. I stared at the page. This can't be right. We lived modestly. She clipped coupons. Mr. Holloway leaned forward. Your wife opened these accounts over 20 years ago. Small investments at first, then strategic ones, technology, shipping, real estate. She never touched the principal. Lucas flipped through more pages. Dad, there are properties listed here, 3 of them, all paid off. My heart pounded. Why would she hide this from us? That's when Daniel froze. Dad, he said slowly, pointing to another document. Look at this name. I followed his finger. Margaret Elaine Carter, formerly Margaret Elaine Shaw. I frowned. Shaw? Her maiden name was Ellis. Mr. Holloway's face darkened. That, he said quietly, is why we asked you not to come alone. Lucas looked up, his voice tight. So, but who is Mom? The envelope wasn't finished. At the bottom was a handwritten letter. I unfolded it carefully, my wife's familiar cursive staring back at me like a ghost. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And the truth can no longer hurt me, right? But it may hurt you. My throat closed. I didn't hide this because I didn't trust you. I hid it because I loved you too much to pull you into the past I escaped. The room felt smaller. My real name is Margaret Shaw. The life you knew was the one I chose, not the one I was born into. Daniel whispered, escaped from what? I kept reading. There are people who will come looking once this vault is opened. Some want money, some want answers, and some want silence. My hands shook harder now. Mr. Holloway cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, there's more. Much more. Lucas asked the question none of us wanted to voice. Are we in danger? The manager didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached back into the vault and placed one final item on the table. A sealed envelope, stamped in red. Confidential. Legal notice pending. That arrived 3 days ago, he said, after we flagged activity on your wife's accounts. Daniel's face went pale. Activity? From who? Mr. Holloway met my eyes. From someone who claims they were supposed to inherit everything. Silence crashed down on us. My wife had lived a double life. And now that she was gone, someone else was stepping forward to collect it. Next, in part 3, we open the legal notice and learn that my wife's past includes a name powerful, enough to shake everything we own, and a deadline that puts our family on a clock. Part 3, the name that should have stayed buried. The envelope felt heavier than it looked. Stamped confidential, legal notice pending. It sat on the steel table like a loaded weapon. No one reached for it. Not Daniel. Not Lucas, not even Mr. Holloway, who suddenly seemed less like a bank manager and more like a man standing at the edge of something dangerous. Open it, Daniel finally said, his voice low. We need to know. I nodded, though every instinct in my body told me this was the moment. Our lives would split into before and after. I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a formal letter printed on expensive paper, bearing the logo of a law firm I recognized immediately. Harrington and Crow, one of the most aggressive firms on the East Coast. The kind that didn't send letters unless they were already 10 moves ahead. I began to read aloud. This notice serves to inform you that a claim has been filed regarding the estate and financial holdings of the late Margaret Elaine Shaw Carter. Daniel stiffened. They're using Shaw, I continued. The claimant asserts lawful entitlement as a surviving partner and beneficiary under agreements executed prior to Ms. Carter's marriage and subsequent name change. Lucas leaned forward. Surviving partner? Business partner? Mr. Holloway exhaled slowly. That's not what it means. My eyes dropped to the name at the bottom of the page. Richard Hale. The room went cold. Mr. Holloway closed his eyes. I was afraid of that. Daniel looked between us. You know him? Everyone in certain circles knows him, the manager said quietly. Richard Hale doesn't just invest. He consumes. He's ruthless, patient, and very, very powerful. Lucas flipped through the pages behind the letter. Dad, there's more. There were attachments. Copies of contracts, old partnership agreements, dated more than 25 years ago, before Margaret ever met me. One paragraph stood out, underlined in blue ink. In the event of disappearance, identity change, or death, all shared assets revert to the surviving party unless otherwise contested. Disappearance? Daniel whispered. Identity change? My chest tightened. Margaret hadn't just changed her name. She had vanished. Mr. Holloway straightened. Mr. Carter, there's something else you need to understand. When your wife opened these accounts, she didn't just invest. She shielded them. Layered trusts, offshore protections, legal firewalls. Lucas frowned. From who? Him, the manager replied. I stared at my wife's handwriting in the earlier letter. The words escaped in silence, echoing in my mind. She was hiding from him, I said. Yes, Mr. Holloway confirmed. And she did it successfully. Until now. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. He has no right. She built this life with us. The law doesn't care about feelings, the manager said. Only signatures. I turned another page. And then I saw it. A photograph. Old, slightly faded. Margaret stood beside a man I barely recognized. Young, sharp-eyed, confident. His arm was around her waist, possessive. The caption beneath read, Hale Shipping Ventures, founding partners. My stomach turned. That man, I said hoarsely, was in her past. Mr. Holloway nodded. They weren't just partners. They were involved. Daniel looked sick. You're saying Mom was with him before you? Yes, I said quietly. And she never told me. Lucas swallowed. Why would she? I thought of all the nights Margaret woke up sweating. The times she froze when unfamiliar numbers called. The way she insisted we never post family photos online. She was protecting us, I said. From him. Mr. Holloway folded his hands. There's more. Hale's claim triggered an automatic review, which means other entities now know this estate exists. Daniel's eyes widened. How many? Enough, the manager replied. And they move fast. Lucas looked at me. Dad, what happens now? I looked back at my wife's letter, the one she never wanted me to read. There are people who will come looking once this vault is opened. She had known. She left us instructions, I said slowly. She wouldn't leave us defenseless. Mr. Holloway nodded. You're right. And that brings us to the second envelope. He reached into the vault again and withdrew a slim black folder. This, he said, wasn't scheduled to be opened until 6 months after her passing. But given the circumstances, I believe she intended you to see it sooner. The folder bore a single word in silver letters. Contingency. My heart pounded. I opened it. Inside was a detailed plan. Names, timelines, lawyers, assets. Already moved into trusts under Daniel's and Lucas's names. Clauses that activated only if Richard Hale resurfaced. At the bottom was one final handwritten note. If Richard Hale is reading this, it means you failed to keep me silent. I felt a strange mix of grief and pride. My wife hadn't just escaped her past. She had prepared for war. Daniel looked up, eyes blazing. Dad, Mom didn't just hide from him. No, I said, closing the folder. She outplayed him. Mr. Holloway gave a grim smile. And now? The game has begun. Next in part 4, Richard Hale makes his first move, and we realize he's not just coming for the money, but for something far more dangerous: control over our family. Part 4, The First Strike. Richard Hale didn't wait. He never did. By the time we left the bank that afternoon, the sky had turned the color of steel, heavy and threatening. I remember thinking how fitting it felt, like the world itself sensed the shift. Whatever quiet life I'd been living since Margaret's death was officially over. The first call came before we even reached the parking lot. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then answered. Daniel Carter. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but I didn't need to. I saw it in my son's eyes, the sudden tension, the way his jaw locked. Yes, this is he. A pause. No, I'm not interested in... His face drained of color. Lucas leaned closer. Who is it? Daniel held up a finger, eyes never leaving the pavement ahead. I'll have my attorney contact you, Daniel said coldly and ended the call. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath the entire time. That was Hale's firm, he said. They already know our names. Of course they do, I replied. Your mother anticipated this. Lucas shook his head. How did they move that fast? Mr. Holloway, who had followed us outside, answered quietly. Because Hale doesn't react. He prepares. As if summoned by his name, a black sedan rolled slowly past the bank entrance. Tinted windows. No plates visible from where we stood. It didn't stop. It didn't need to. The message was clear: I see you. That night none of us slept. By morning the attacks came in waves. Daniel's company received an anonymous tip alleging financial misconduct. False, but damaging enough to trigger an audit. Lucas's university scholarship was suddenly under review. My pension account was temporarily frozen pending identity verification. Hale wasn't trying to take everything at once. He was destabilizing us, testing our defenses. By noon, our attorney, Margaret's attorney, arrived at the house. Her name was Elaine Morris, and she had the calm confidence of someone who'd stared down far worse than a billionaire with a bruised ego. She planned this beautifully, Elaine said after reviewing the contingency file. Hale can't touch the core assets. Not legally. Daniel leaned forward. Then why does it feel like we're losing ground? Because he's fighting outside the courtroom, she replied. Reputation, pressure, fear. I clenched my hands. He's trying to scare us into settling. Yes, Elaine said. Or into making a mistake. Lucas rubbed his temples. What's his endgame? Elaine looked at me. You. I frowned. Me? Hale's claim hinges on proving Margaret wasn't of sound mind when she set up these trusts, Elaine explained. If he can convince a court she was manipulated or coerced, he can challenge everything. Daniel stiffened. You think he'll say Dad controlled her? Or that your father was unaware and therefore unfit to execute her intentions? Elaine corrected. Which brings us to the real danger. She slid a document across the table. A petition. Request for mental capacity evaluation. Harold Carter. My name sat at the top like a target. They're questioning your competence, Lucas said quietly. Elaine nodded. If they succeed, Hale could petition for a temporary conservatorship over the estate. Daniel shot to his feet. That's insane. Dad is sharp as hell. Insanity isn't the point, Elaine replied. Control is. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest, not panic, not fear. Anger. He thinks I'm weak, I said. That because I'm old I'll fold. Elaine met my eyes. That's exactly what he thinks. I stood slowly, every joint aching, but my mind crystal clear. Then it's time we stop playing defense. Daniel looked at me. Dad? What are you thinking? I walked to Margaret's old desk and opened the bottom drawer, the one she always kept locked. Inside was a slim leather folder I'd never touched before. I placed it on the table. Margaret's handwriting stared back at us. Phase 2. Elaine's eyebrows rose. You didn't mention this. I didn't know it existed, I said. but I know what it means. Lucas opened the folder. Inside were records, old shipping manifests, shell companies, offshore accounts tied not to Margaret, but to Richard Hale. And not clean ones. Elaine's breath caught. These are illegal. Not alleged, I replied. Documented. Daniel looked at me in disbelief. Mom had dirt on him? No, I corrected softly. She had insurance. Elaine closed the folder carefully. If we release this, it will be war. I nodded. It already is. Silence settled over the room. Finally, Daniel spoke. What do we do first? I looked at my son, strong, shaken, but standing. We let him think his plan is working, I said. We cooperate, we smile. And when he overreaches, Elaine finished the sentence. We end him. That evening, a courier arrived with a formal notice. A court-ordered evaluation. Richard Hale wasn't waiting anymore. He was coming for my freedom, and this time, he was stepping exactly where Margaret wanted him. Next in Part 5, the evaluation becomes a trap, and during a private hearing, Richard Hale makes a fatal mistake that exposes far more than he intended. Part 5 in the evaluation. The evaluation was scheduled for the following Monday. Court-ordered, mandatory, no room for refusal. Richard Hale had timed it perfectly, early enough to rattle us, public enough to send a message, and invasive enough to feel humiliating. That was the point. He wanted to reduce me from a man to a question mark. Is he competent? Is he confused? Is he still in control? The morning of the evaluation, Elaine arrived early. She looked composed, but I could see the tension in her eyes. Remember, she said quietly, this isn't about intelligence. It's about consistency, calm, clarity. I nodded. I understand. Daniel hovered nearby, pretending to check his phone for the 10th time. Dad, he said finally, if this feels like too much. It's not, I interrupted gently. What would be too much is letting someone decide my life without me in the room. Lucas placed a hand on my shoulder. We're with you. That mattered more than anything. The evaluation took place in a private medical office downtown. Neutral, sterile, designed to feel objective. Two professionals waited inside, a psychiatrist and a court-appointed cognitive specialist, polite, detached, clipboards ready. And then, uninvited but expected, Richard Hale's attorney arrived. I'm just here as an observer, she said smoothly. Elaine's jaw tightened. Not without my presence. Of course, the attorney smiled. Transparency is important. The evaluation began. Dates, names, patterns. I answered calmly, precisely. What year is it? Who is the current president? Can you explain the purpose of this evaluation? I could feel their attention sharpening. Not because I was failing, but because I wasn't. The psychiatrist glanced at his colleague. Mr. Carter, he said, how would you describe your understanding of your financial situation? I met his gaze. Complex, but stable, structured for long-term preservation and inheritance. The attorney shifted slightly in her seat. Do you feel dependent on your sons? She asked. No, I replied. I feel supported by them. There's a difference. The room fell quiet. After nearly an hour, the psychiatrist closed his folder. Mr. Carter, he said, there's nothing here that suggests impairment. The attorney's smile faltered. Nothing at all? She pressed. Nothing, he repeated. Elaine exhaled slowly. But Hale wasn't finished. 2 days later, Elaine received a call. Hale has requested a private hearing, she told us. He's claiming new evidence. Daniel clenched his fists. Of course he is. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Too quickly. Inside the courtroom, Richard Hale appeared for the first time. In person. He was exactly how I imagined him from the old photo. Tall, immaculate, eyes sharp with entitlement. When his gaze landed on me, a slow smile crept across his face. Harold, he said as if we were old friends. You've aged well. I said nothing. His lawyer began speaking accusations of manipulation, claims that Margaret had been misled in her final years, suggestions that I had pressured her into rewriting trusts. Then Hale stood. "I loved Margaret," he said smoothly, "before anyone else here knew her. I built everything with her, and then she vanished." He turned toward the judge. "She erased herself, changed her name, lied to everyone, including this man." He looked back at me. "And now he wants to pretend he's innocent." I felt Daniel tense beside me. Elaine rose calmly. "Your Honor," she said, "we request permission to present counter-evidence." Hale smiled. "By all means." Elaine nodded once to me. I stood, and for the first time I spoke directly to Richard Hale. "You're right about one thing," I said evenly. "Margaret vanished." Hale's eyes gleamed. Finally, some honesty. "She vanished," I continued, "because she discovered what you were doing." The courtroom stirred. I turned to the judge. "My wife didn't leave out of fear," I said. "She left because she gathered proof." Elaine placed the Phase 2 folder on the table. Hale's smile froze. "These documents," Elaine said, opening the folder, "detail illegal shipping reroutes, offshore laundering, and falsified corporate disclosures tied directly to Mr. Hale's companies." Hale's attorney stood abruptly. "Objection." "Denied," the judge said sharply. Elaine continued. "Margaret Shaw Carter preserved these records for over 20 years, and she designed her estate to activate protections the moment Mr. Hale resurfaced." Hale's face darkened. "You think this changes anything?" I met his eyes. "It changes everything," I said, because at that moment Hale realized the truth. He hadn't walked into a weak man's courtroom. He'd walked into a trap, built decades ago by a woman who knew exactly what kind of man he was. Next in Part 6, the court launches a formal investigation into Richard Hale, and as pressure mounts, he makes a reckless move that puts his entire empire at risk. Part 6. When the hunter became the hunted. The courtroom didn't erupt. There was no shouting, no dramatic gasps, just a subtle shift in the air, like pressure changing before a storm. Richard Hale knew it too. I saw it in his eyes the moment Elaine finished presenting the documents. The confidence he'd carried like a tailored suit slipped, just enough to reveal what sat underneath it. Fear. Not panic, not yet, but calculation. The judge called a recess. 10 minutes. That was all Hale needed. By the time we stepped into the hallway, Elaine's phone was already buzzing. "Federal Compliance Office," she murmured, reading the screen. "They move fast." Daniel stared at her. "You mean?" "Yes," she said. The court forwarded the materials. "Hale is officially under preliminary investigation." Lucas let out a breath he'd been holding for weeks. "So it's over?" Elaine shook her head. "For men like Hale, it's never over. It's just escalated." She was right. That night, everything accelerated. The first sign was subtle. A black SUV parked across the street from my house. Engine idling, no plates. Gone by morning. The second was louder. Daniel's company received a cease and desist letter alleging breach of non-compete agreements he'd never signed. Lucas's bank temporarily froze his checking account, pending verification. Mine. Someone attempted to file an emergency guardianship petition again. Only this time it wasn't through the courts. It was through a private physician Hale had influence over. Elaine shut it down within hours. "That was reckless," she said grimly. "He's panicking." I stared out the window at the empty street. "He's cornered," I said. "Cornered animals don't retreat. They charge." 2 days later, the news broke. Not the full story, just a whisper. Federal authorities reviewing Hale shipping ventures following internal allegations. The article was careful, non-committal, but Hale's name was out there now in the wrong context. Stock prices dipped. Partners started asking questions. And Richard Hale made his biggest mistake. He called me. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. Harold, he said smoothly, like no time had passed. We need to talk. About what? I asked. About ending this, he replied. Quietly. I almost laughed. You don't get to decide that anymore, I said. He sighed. You think you've won. You haven't. No, I said calmly. But you've lost. There was a pause. You don't understand what you're risking, he said, voice lowering. People get hurt when things like this go public. I understand exactly what I'm risking, I replied. I lived with your shadow for 25 years without knowing it. His tone sharpened. Margaret stole from me. No, I corrected. She documented you. Silence. Then softly. You could still walk away with something. I leaned back in my chair. She already walked away, I said. And she took your future with her. The line went dead. The next morning, Elaine arrived early. Hale's attorney has withdrawn, she said. Daniel blinked. Just like that? He didn't want to go down with him, she replied. And neither do the others. Lucas frowned. Others? Elaine slid a document across the table. A list of subpoenas. Executives. Accountants. Shell company directors. Hale's network was unraveling. But power doesn't disappear quietly. That afternoon, a private investigator showed up at my door, posing as a delivery driver. Elaine chased him off before he could speak to me. That's intimidation, Daniel snapped. No, Elaine said. That's desperation. The federal investigation became official 3 days later. Hale Shipping Ventures offices were searched. Computers seized. Records copied. The news cycle finally caught up. Shipping tycoon under federal scrutiny. Former partner's estate central to case. Margaret's name wasn't printed, but I knew she was smiling somewhere. Then came the message that chilled me more than all the rest. A voicemail. No caller ID. Tell your sons to stay out of this, Hale's voice said quietly. I can still make this personal. I handed the phone to Elaine without a word. She listened, once. Then she smiled, slow and sharp. Good, she said. That's the last thing he should have done. Daniel looked at her. Why? Because now, she replied. It's no longer just a financial investigation. She turned to me. It's criminal. That night I sat alone in Margaret's old chair holding her letter again. She had known this moment would come. Not hoped for it. Prepared for it. Richard Hale had spent his life believing power meant never answering to anyone. He was about to learn the truth. Power answers to time, and time had finally caught up with him. Next in Part 7, as the investigation tightens, Richard Hale makes one final, dangerous attempt to regain control, putting my family directly in harm's way and forcing us to make a choice that could change everything forever. Part 7, the final threat. Richard Hale didn't collapse the way people expect powerful men to. He didn't disappear. He didn't apologize. And he certainly didn't surrender. He pressed harder. The morning after the voicemail, Elaine arrived with a look I hadn't seen before, not fear, but urgency sharpened into focus. He's filed a counterclaim, she said. Not against the estate. Against you, personally. Daniel stood up. For what? Elaine placed the papers on the table. Defamation, emotional distress, interference with business relations. Lucas laughed bitterly. He's blaming Dad for his own crimes? Yes, Elaine said. And he's doing it loudly. The claim was absurd, but that wasn't the point. He's trying to drain us, Daniel said quietly. Time, money, energy. Exactly, Elaine replied. And distract from the criminal investigation. I scanned the document calmly. He's running out of moves, I said. Elaine met my eyes. Which makes him dangerous. That afternoon, something happened that confirmed her warning. Lucas didn't come home. He was supposed to be back by 6. 7 passed. Then 8, Daniel called. Straight to voicemail. By 9, my chest felt tight in a way no court document had managed to cause. Elaine was already dialing contacts. Stay calm, she said. Let's not jump to... The door opened suddenly. Lucas stepped inside, pale, jaw clenched. Daniel rushed to him. Where the hell were you? Lucas exhaled shakily. I was followed. Silence dropped over the room. From campus, Lucas continued. Same black SUV, it didn't approach me. Just stayed close. Like it wanted me to notice. Elaine closed her eyes briefly. That's intimidation, she said. And now it's documented. Lucas looked at me. Dad, he wants you to stop. I nodded slowly. I know. That night Elaine made arrangements. Security cameras, legal injunctions, emergency contacts. And one more thing. We can request witness protection, she said. Temporary. Until charges are filed. Daniel looked at me. Dad? I thought of Margaret. Of all the years she lived quietly, watching over us without us ever knowing why. No, I said. We stay visible. Elaine raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Yes, I replied. Hale thrives in shadows, not sunlight. 2 days later, the subpoena list expanded. Richard Hale was formally named a person of interest in a federal criminal case. And that's when he made his last mistake. He showed up. Not at my house. At the bank. Mr. Holloway called me himself, voice tight. He's here, he said. Demanding access to the vault. And he's not calm. Elaine was already grabbing her coat. Good, let him talk. We arrived 20 minutes later. Hale stood in the lobby, surrounded by security, his composure cracking at the edges. When he saw me, his eyes burned. You think you've won, he hissed, stepping forward. I think you've forgotten, I replied evenly, that this isn't your world anymore. He laughed sharply. Margaret belonged to me before you ever knew her. That sentence changed everything. The security guard stiffened. Elaine's expression hardened. Sir, say that again. Hale froze. Too late. Elaine turned to the guard. You may want to notify federal authorities. He just admitted prior coercive involvement with a protected witness. Hale's face went white. You can't twist words like that. I didn't twist anything, Elaine said calmly. You volunteered it. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Hale backed away slowly, suddenly aware that for the first time in his life, the room was no longer bending to him. He looked at me one last time. This ends badly, he said quietly. I met his gaze. It already has, I replied. That night, Daniel sat beside me on the porch. I'm scared, he admitted. Not of him. Of what this is costing you. I looked at my son, grown, steady, finally seeing the full picture. It cost your mother everything, I said softly. I can carry the rest. A week later, the call came. An arrest warrant had been approved. Richard Hale was officially out of moves. But closure doesn't arrive with handcuffs. It arrives with truth. And the truth was finally on its way. Next in Part 8. The arrest shocks the business world. But the most painful revelation comes afterward, when we learn what Margaret sacrificed to make sure we survived this moment. Part 8. What she gave up. The arrest didn't happen with flashing lights on the evening news. Richard Hale was taken in quietly, early in the morning, just as the city was waking up. Federal agents entered his penthouse while the world still believed he was untouchable. By noon, the headlines were everywhere. Shipping mogul. Richard Hale arrested in federal fraud and coercion case. Daniel read it aloud at the breakfast table, disbelief mixing with relief. They finally got him, he said. Lucas stared at the screen. So it's over? I didn't answer right away, because endings are rarely clean. That afternoon, Elaine called us into her office. There's something you need to see, she said. Her tone wasn't celebratory. It was careful. On the conference table lay a slim envelope, worn at the edges, sealed with wax already cracked. Elaine slid it toward me. This was released as part of the federal evidence review, she explained. It was stored under Margaret's original identity. The investigators believe it was meant for you, but only if Hale was exposed. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was another letter. Margaret's handwriting. Familiar, steady, braver than I ever realized. If you are reading this, then Richard Hale is no longer free. My throat tightened. That means you are safe. And our sons are safe. That was always the only outcome that mattered to me. Daniel leaned closer, reading over my shoulder. Lucas sat down slowly, as if his legs had given out. You may wonder why I never told you the truth. Why I lived smaller than I could have. Why I disappeared instead of fighting. I paused, blinking hard. I didn't run because I was weak. I ran because I was pregnant, and Hale had already begun to threaten anyone who stood between him and control. Lucas inhaled sharply. Pregnant. I chose anonymity over luxury. Silence over power, because power with a man like him always has a price. My hands shook now. Everything I built after that, every investment, every trust was never about money. It was about time. Buying enough distance so that one day, when he resurfaced, he would be the one exposed. Elaine quietly handed Daniel another document. An affidavit, signed by Margaret, dated nearly 30 years ago. It detailed coercion, surveillance, financial abuse, threats disguised as affection. She documented everything, Elaine said softly, and never used it. Until now. Lucas covered his mouth. She lived her whole life waiting for this moment, he whispered. I kept reading. I know this will hurt you. I know you may feel betrayed. Please don't. The life I lived with you was the only real life I ever had. Tears blurred the words. If our sons are strong, it's because they learned strength from love, not fear. Daniel wiped his eyes. And if you are still standing, my love, it means I chose right. The letter ended simply. Thank you for believing I was more than what my past tried to make me. We sat in silence long after. The arrest had closed one chapter. This letter opened another. One filled not with anger, but with understanding. She carried this alone, Daniel said quietly. All these years, and never once made us afraid, Lucas added. I folded the letter carefully. She didn't want to be remembered as a victim, I said. She wanted us to live free. Elaine nodded. And because of her preparation, Hale's legal team is collapsing. Multiple executives are cooperating. The case will move quickly now. Lucas looked up. What happens to the money? Elaine smiled faintly. It stays exactly where Margaret intended. That evening, we went home together. For the first time since this began, the house felt peaceful. Daniel poured tea. Lucas opened windows. Small things, human things. I placed Margaret's letter in the desk drawer, the one she always kept locked. I think, Daniel said after a while, she trusted you more than anyone. I smiled sadly. She trusted time, I said, and she trusted truth. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Richard Hale was in custody. The threat was gone. But what remained was something far more powerful. The legacy of a woman who sacrificed everything so her family wouldn't have to. Next in Part 9. The trial begins, the world learns who Margaret really was. And I'm faced with one final decision that will define how her story ends. Part 9, The Trial and the Choice. The trial began 6 months later. By then, Richard Hale was no longer the untouchable titan the media once worshipped. His name appeared in headlines beside words like indictment, wire fraud, coercion, and obstruction. Former partners testified. Accountants turned state's evidence. Even people who once praised his vision now avoided his name. And at the center of it all, quietly, unwillingly, was my late wife. Margaret Shaw Carter. The prosecution didn't call her a victim. They called her the key witness who never had to speak. Elaine explained it to us the night before opening statements. Her records are airtight, she said. They show intent, pattern, and escalation. Hale didn't just commit crimes, he built a system around them. And she preserved proof of every layer. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. All those years, she was carrying a federal case in a drawer. I stared at the table. She was carrying us. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Reporters, analysts, curious onlookers who had once admired Hale's empire. When he was brought in, wearing a plain suit instead of tailored power, I barely recognized him. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. But when the prosecution introduced Exhibit A, Margaret's first affidavit, he flinched. The words were read aloud. Her words, clear, calm, unafraid, as if she were standing there herself. I felt something unexpected then, not anger. Peace. During a break, the lead prosecutor approached me. Mr. Carter, she said respectfully, your wife's documentation saved years of investigation. We'd like to acknowledge her role publicly. I hesitated. Daniel and Lucas looked at me. What does that mean? Lucas asked. She'd be named, the prosecutor replied. Recognized as a whistleblower. Her story would be told. I thought of Margaret's letter. I didn't want to be remembered as a victim. I need time, I said. That night I sat alone in the living room, Margaret's letter open in my hands. Would she have wanted the world to know? Or was anonymity her final gift, to herself and to us? Daniel joined me quietly. You don't owe anyone an explanation, he said. I know, I replied. But she deserves to be seen for who she really was. Lucas sat down across from us. She was brave, he said. Whether people know her name or not. I smiled faintly. She was. The next day, I made my decision. Elaine relayed it to the prosecution. Margaret's evidence could be used. Her name could be acknowledged in sealed records. But there would be no press tour, no spotlight, no public hero narrative. Let the facts speak. That was her way. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all major counts. Richard Hale was sentenced to decades in federal prison. His empire dismantled, his influence erased not by force but by truth. As he was led away, he glanced toward me once, not with anger, with something closer to disbelief, that a woman he tried to control had outlived him. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited. I said only one thing. My wife believed that truth doesn't need noise. It just needs time. Then I walked away. That evening, back at home, Daniel opened a bottle of wine Margaret had saved for someday. Lucas raised his glass. To Mom. To Margaret, Daniel corrected gently. I smiled. To the woman who chose love over fear, I said. The world would move on. But we wouldn't forget. Not the danger. Not the sacrifice. And not the quiet strength that carried us through. Only one chapter remained. Not about justice, but about life after it. Final part 10. What happens after the trial ends, how we rebuild, what we keep, and the promise I make that ensures Margaret's story doesn't fade. But finally rests. Part 10, What Remains. When the trial ended, the world moved on faster than I expected. New scandals replaced old headlines. Richard Hale's name slowly faded from conversations that once revolved around him. His empire was dismantled piece by piece, absorbed, renamed, forgotten. But inside our home, time slowed. The silence after justice is different. It's not empty. It's reflective. For weeks after the verdict, I found myself waking early, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea Margaret once favored, staring out the window as sunlight crept across the floor. For the first time in decades, there was no danger waiting beyond the door, no contingency left unopened. Just life. Daniel took a leave from work. Lucas finished his degree and came home more often. We cooked together, laughed at things that had nothing to do with lawyers or courts. Slowly, without realizing it, we began living the life Margaret had fought to protect. One afternoon, Daniel brought me a folder. I've been reviewing Mom's trusts, he said. Everything's secure, but there's something else. Inside was a small account I hadn't noticed before. Not large, not flashy, just enough. What's this for? I asked. Daniel smiled. Look at the memo. I did. For the quiet rebuilding. That was Margaret. Always precise. Always thoughtful. We used that money the way she would have wanted. Not for luxury, but for meaning. We funded scholarships quietly for students who had escaped abusive power structures. We supported legal aid organizations that protected people without voices. No plaques, no names, just action. Lucas asked once, "Shouldn't people know this came from Mom?" I shook my head. She didn't do it to be remembered. She did it to make sure others didn't have to disappear the way she did. He nodded, understanding. Months later, I returned to the bank one last time. Mr. Holloway greeted me with a smile that held relief. "Closing the final account?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "There's nothing left to protect now." As I left, I felt lighter than I had in years. That chapter was finished. On the anniversary of Margaret's passing, we gathered in the garden she loved. No speeches, no grand gestures, just 3 chairs, a gentle breeze, and a shared silence that didn't ache anymore. Daniel broke it softly. "I used to think strength meant standing your ground," he said. "Now I think it means knowing when to walk away." Lucas added, "and knowing what's worth carrying." I looked at them. My sons, my legacy, my proof that her choices mattered. "She carried fear so you wouldn't have to," I said. "Now we carry her values." That night before bed, I placed Margaret's final letter back into the drawer. Not locked, never locked. Some truths don't need protection once they've done their work. As I turned off the light, I whispered words I'd held back for years. "You did it," I said. "We're safe." And for the first time since the phone call that started it all, I slept without listening for footsteps in the dark. Margaret's story didn't end with exposure. It ended with peace. And that, I realized, was exactly how she wanted it. The end.